I recently reviewed a client's financial situation. Call him David. Successful professional, making $180,000 a year, very organized, very disciplined about his money. He had 8 different savings accounts. 8. 1 for emergencies, 1 for vacation, 1 for a new car, 1 for home repairs, 1 for holiday gifts, 1 for his kids' activities, 1 for property taxes, 1 for general savings. Each account had a specific purpose, a specific label, a specific goal. He was incredibly proud of this system. He thought this was sophisticated financial management. But when I looked at the numbers, when I analyzed his actual returns and his overall wealth trajectory, I had to tell him something difficult. This system was costing him hundreds of thousands of dollars. Because while he thought he was being smart by separating his money into different buckets, what he was actually doing was falling into one of the most expensive psychological traps in personal finance. It's called mental accounting. And after managing money for nearly 50 years, I can tell you it's one of the biggest wealth destroyers I see, even among intelligent, financially literate people. Before we dive in, please support this content by liking the video and subscribing to the channel with notifications enabled. It helps us continue creating this kind of detailed financial education. Let me explain what mental accounting is and why it matters so much. Mental accounting is a cognitive bias where people treat money differently depending on where it comes from, where it's located, or what it's designated for. Instead of viewing all money as fungible, which is what it actually is, people create mental categories and then make different decisions about money in different categories, even though economically, it's all the same money. David's 8 savings accounts are a perfect example. He had $45,000 spread across these 8 accounts. Emergency fund, $15,000. Vacation, $5,000. New car, $8,000. Home repairs, $3,000. Holiday gifts, $2,000. Kids' activities, $4,000. Property taxes, $6,000. General savings, $2,000. And because each account had a specific label and purpose, David felt like he couldn't touch that money for anything else. The vacation money was for vacation. The car money was for a car. The emergency money was for emergencies. These weren't just accounts. They were mental categories with rigid boundaries. But here's the problem. All of these accounts were earning 0.01% interest. Essentially nothing. They were sitting in standard savings accounts at his regular bank. And David wasn't investing any of this money because in his mind, it wasn't investment money. It was savings money with specific purposes. The idea of investing his vacation fund or his car fund felt wrong to him. Those categories weren't for growth. They were for safety and liquidity. So he kept all $45,000 in cash, earning nothing. Meanwhile, he was also contributing to his 401k, which is good. But only the minimum to get his employer match, 6% of his salary. He wasn't maxing it out. Why? Because mentally, he'd already allocated his cash flow. The 401k was getting its designated amount. The 8 savings accounts were getting their designated amounts. And there wasn't anything left to increase his retirement contributions. He'd created rigid mental buckets for his money, and those buckets prevented him from optimizing his overall financial situation. When I showed David that if he consolidated those 8 accounts into 1 or 2, invested the money appropriately based on actual time horizons rather than mental labels, and increased his 401k contributions with the money he was over-saving in short-term accounts, he could potentially have an additional $300,000 to $400,000 by retirement. He was stunned. He'd been so focused on organizing his money into neat categories that he'd never stepped back to look at the overall system and ask whether the organization was actually serving his financial goals or just serving his psychological need for order. This is mental accounting, and it's everywhere. It affects almost everyone to some degree. And it costs enormous amounts of money over a lifetime. At BlackRock, we study behavioral finance extensively. We look at the psychological biases and mental errors that cause people to make suboptimal financial decisions. And mental accounting consistently ranks as one of the most prevalent and most costly biases we observe. It shows up in countless ways, and most people don't even realize they're doing it. Let me give you some other common examples. People who have credit card debt at 18% interest but also have money sitting in a savings account earning 4% interest. Economically, this makes no sense. They should use the savings to pay off the debt. They'd immediately earn a guaranteed 14% return by eliminating that interest rate spread. But mentally, the savings account is emergency money, and the credit card debt is credit card debt, and they're in different mental categories. So people keep paying 18% interest while earning 4% interest on money they could use to eliminate the high-interest debt. Or people who receive a tax refund and treat it as found money, or bonus money, and spend it on something frivolous, even though they're struggling to make ends meet. Economically, a tax refund is just your own money being returned to you. You overpaid taxes during the year, and now the government is giving back the excess. It's not a windfall. It's not extra. It's your money. But mentally, because it comes as a lump sum, because it feels unexpected even though it happens every year, people categorize it differently and spend it differently than they would their regular paycheck. Or people who have a fun money category and a serious money category. They'll drop $500 on a weekend trip without thinking twice because that's fun money and fun money is for spending. But they'll agonize over a $500 investment in professional development or a $500 increase to their 401k contribution because that's serious money, and serious money requires careful consideration. Same $500. Different mental category. Different decision-making process. And often, the fun money decision is suboptimal from a wealth-building perspective, but the mental accounting makes it feel okay. These examples might seem trivial. They might seem like minor inefficiencies. But they compound over time. Over decades, mental accounting costs people tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of dollars in foregone wealth. And the insidious part is that mental accounting feels responsible. It feels prudent. It feels like good financial management. You're being organized. You're being intentional. You're tracking your money carefully. All of which are good things in principle. But if the organizational system itself is flawed, if it's optimizing for psychological comfort rather than economic outcomes, you're doing all this work and paying a huge price for it. At BlackRock, when we construct portfolios for institutional clients, pension funds, endowments, sovereign wealth funds, we don't think about money in categories the way individuals do. We don't have separate piles for different purposes. We have a unified pool of capital, and we optimize the entire portfolio based on the overall objectives, time horizons, risk tolerances, and return requirements. Yes, we think about different asset classes. Yes, we think about liquidity needs. But it's all one integrated system. The goal is to maximize risk-adjusted returns for the total portfolio, not to make sure each individual mental bucket is comfortable and safe. Individual investors should think the same way. But they don't. And the reason they don't is psychological, not economic. Mental accounting is a deeply ingrained cognitive bias. It's rooted in how the human brain processes information and makes decisions. And understanding why we do this, understanding the psychological mechanisms at work, that's the first step toward overcoming it. Let me explain the psychology. Mental accounting exists because the human brain has limited cognitive capacity. We can't process infinite amounts of information simultaneously. We can't optimize across infinite variables. So our brains use shortcuts. They simplify complex situations by breaking them into smaller, more manageable pieces. And one of those shortcuts is to categorize money into different mental accounts and then treat each account according to its label rather than according to overall economic optimization. This made sense evolutionarily. For most of human history, people dealt with physical resources. You had grain stored in one place for winter. You had livestock for meat and milk. You had tools for farming. These were literally different things that served different purposes, and you managed them separately because they were physically separate. Mental accounting is an extension of that physical resource management into the domain of money. But money isn't like grain or livestock. Money is fungible. It's all the same. $1,000 in your vacation fund is exactly the same as $1,000 in your emergency fund. It's just electrons in a computer. The only difference is the label you've applied mentally. But our brains don't fully grasp this. Our brains still think about money like it's physical resources that need to be kept in separate silos. And this mental model, which was adaptive for managing physical resources, becomes maladaptive when applied to fungible financial assets. It causes us to sub-optimize. It causes us to make decisions that feel right psychologically but are wrong economically. Another psychological mechanism at work is loss aversion. People are more afraid of losses than they are motivated by equivalent gains. And when you create mental accounts, you create opportunities to experience psychological losses. If you take money from your emergency fund to invest it, even though investing is economically rational, it feels like you're reducing your emergency fund. It feels like a loss of security. And that loss aversion prevents you from making the economically optimal decision. Similarly, mental accounting allows people to engage in self-deception about their financial situation. If you have $20,000 in savings accounts and $15,000 in credit card debt, mentally, you might focus on the $20,000 and feel like you're doing okay financially. You have savings. You're responsible. But economically, your net financial position is $5,000. And if that credit card debt is at 18% interest, you're losing money every month. But the mental accounts allow you to avoid confronting this reality. The savings are in one mental bucket. The debt is in a different mental bucket. And you don't have to think about the net position. At BlackRock, we see this pattern all the time. People who are objectively not in good financial shape but who feel fine because they've structured their mental accounts in a way that allows them to focus on the positives and ignore the negatives. This is self-deception, and mental accounting enables it. Now, I want to be clear about something. I'm not saying that all financial categorization is bad. There are legitimate reasons to think about money in different ways based on actual time horizons and actual purposes. If you need money in the next 6 months for a specific expense, it should be in a liquid, low-risk account. If you won't need money for 30 years, it should be invested aggressively for growth. That's not mental accounting. That's rational financial planning. Mental accounting is different. Mental accounting is when the categorization is psychological rather than economic. When you're keeping money in separate accounts not because they have genuinely different time horizons or risk profiles, but because they have different emotional labels. When you're making different decisions about economically equivalent money because of those labels. That's when it becomes a problem. That's when it starts costing you money. Let me give you a framework for distinguishing between useful financial categorization and harmful mental accounting. Ask yourself, would a completely rational, emotionless economic optimizer structure my finances this way? If the answer is no, if the only reason for the structure is psychological comfort or habit or convention, then you're probably engaging in mental accounting. And you should examine whether that mental accounting is serving you economically or costing you. David's 8 savings accounts failed this test. A rational optimizer would look at his financial situation and say, you have $45,000 in liquid savings. You have various expenses coming up over different time horizons. You should invest the money according to when you actually need it, not according to what label you've applied to it. Money you need in the next year should be in high-yield savings or money market funds earning 4% to 5%. Money you don't need for 5 to 10 years should be in a balanced investment portfolio. Money you don't need for 30 years should be in equities for maximum growth. And you should optimize your tax-advantaged accounts first before accumulating large amounts in taxable savings accounts. But David wasn't thinking this way. He was thinking in terms of purposes and labels. And those mental categories prevented him from seeing the economic reality. This is the trap. The organization felt good. It felt responsible. It felt like control. But it was actually costing him a fortune. Now, here's what makes this particularly insidious. Mental accounting often masquerades as financial discipline. People like David think they're being smart by segregating their money. Financial advisors sometimes even encourage it. You'll see advice that says, open separate savings accounts for different goals. Label them, track them individually, and on the surface, this sounds reasonable. It sounds like good planning. But here's what that advice misses. The labels become constraints. The categories become rigid, and rigidity in financial planning is usually suboptimal because it prevents you from adapting to changing circumstances and it prevents you from optimizing your overall financial system. At BlackRock, we don't use rigid categories. We use flexible frameworks. We think about liquidity needs, time horizons, risk tolerances, and return requirements. And we adjust constantly based on market conditions, client circumstances, and opportunities. Flexibility allows optimization. Rigidity prevents it. And mental accounting is a form of rigidity. So here's what I want you to understand from this introduction. Mental accounting is a cognitive bias that causes you to treat economically equivalent money differently based on psychological labels. It's extremely common. It feels responsible and organized. But it's costing you money. Potentially a lot of money over your lifetime. And most people don't even realize they're doing it because it's so ingrained, so normalized, so reinforced by conventional personal finance advice. What we're going to do in this conversation is explore mental accounting in depth. We're going to look at all the different forms it takes. We're going to examine the psychological mechanisms that drive it. We're going to calculate exactly how much it costs. And most importantly, we're going to talk about how to overcome it. How to restructure your financial thinking and your financial systems to optimize for economic outcomes rather than psychological comfort. Because once you see mental accounting for what it is, once you understand how it works and why it's harmful, you can't unsee it. And you can start making changes that will compound into significant wealth differences over time. This isn't about being perfect. It's not about eliminating all emotion from financial decisions. That's impossible and probably not even desirable. But it is about being aware. It's about recognizing when you're engaging in mental accounting. It's about asking whether your financial structure is actually serving your goals or just serving your psychological need for order. And it's about being willing to make changes when you identify inefficiencies. Because here's the thing. Personal finance isn't actually that complicated from an economic standpoint. Spend less than you earn. Invest the difference in a diversified portfolio of assets appropriate for your time horizon. Minimize taxes and fees. That's basically it. But psychology makes it complicated. Cognitive biases make it complicated. And mental accounting is one of the biggest cognitive biases that causes people to deviate from simple, economically optimal behavior. So let's dive in. Let's understand this bias fully. Let's calculate its cost. And let's figure out how to overcome it so you can keep more of your money and build more wealth over your lifetime. Because that's what this is really about. Not being perfect. Not eliminating all categorization. But optimizing your overall financial system to serve your actual goals rather than your psychological quirks. That's what separates people who accumulate significant wealth from people who don't. And mental accounting is one of the major obstacles standing in the way. Alright, let's get specific about how mental accounting actually costs you money. Because it's one thing to understand it conceptually. It's another thing to see the actual dollar amounts, the actual wealth destruction over time. And when you see the numbers, when you understand the magnitude of what's at stake, you can't ignore it anymore. You have to address it. I want to start with the most common and most expensive form of mental accounting I see, the separation of savings from investments. This is what David was doing with his 8 accounts, and it's what millions of people do without realizing the cost. Here's the typical pattern. People have savings accounts for various purposes. Emergency fund, car replacement, home repairs, whatever. And they keep this money in savings accounts earning minimal interest because they view it as savings money, rather than investment money. The mental category determines the financial treatment. If it's labeled savings, it goes in a savings account. If it's labeled investment, it goes in a brokerage account or retirement account. The label drives the decision. But here's what this costs. Let's say you have $30,000 in various savings accounts earning 0.5% interest. That's $150 per year. Over 20 years, assuming you maintain that $30,000 balance, you earn $3,000 in interest. Now let's say instead you keep $10,000 in a high-yield savings account earning 4.5% for true liquidity needs. Money you might need in the next 6 to 12 months. That's $450 per year. And you invest the other $20,000 in a balanced portfolio earning 7% annually because you don't actually need it for several years despite its mental label. Over 20 years at 7%, that $20,000 becomes $77,400. So in scenario 1, total money after 20 years, $33,000. In scenario 2, total money after 20 years, $87,400. The difference? $54,400. From one decision about how to categorize and treat $30,000. And this is conservative. Many people have much more than $30,000 in low-yielding savings accounts. And many people maintain these balances not for 20 years but for their entire adult lives, 30 or 40 years. The cumulative cost can easily exceed $100,000. At BlackRock, when we audit people's financial situations, this is one of the first things we look at. How much money is sitting in low-yield accounts earning nothing? How much of that money is truly needed for near-term liquidity? And how much is just parked there because of mental accounting, because someone labeled it savings 10 years ago and never reconsidered whether that money could be working harder? The answer is usually shocking. People have $50,000, $100,000, sometimes $200,000 or more sitting in savings accounts or money market accounts earning 1% or less when they don't actually need liquidity on that full amount. Maybe they need liquidity on $20,000. The rest could be invested. But the mental accounting prevents them from seeing this opportunity. Now let me talk about the second major form of mental accounting, house money effect. This is when people treat money they've won or money that came from investment gains differently than money they earned through work. It's incredibly common and incredibly expensive. Here's how it works. Someone invests $10,000 in stocks. The stocks go up. Now they have $15,000. That extra $5,000, psychologically, doesn't feel like real money. It feels like house money, like gambling winnings, like money they didn't work for and therefore money they can afford to lose or spend frivolously. So they take more risk with it. Or they withdraw it and spend it on something they wouldn't normally buy. Because it's in a different mental category than their salary money. But economically, this is irrational. That $5,000 is real money. It's exactly as valuable as $5,000 earned through salary. It can buy the same things. It has the same purchasing power. The only difference is psychological. Where it came from. And that psychological difference causes people to make different decisions, usually worse decisions. I see this all the time with investment gains. Someone makes $20,000 on a stock trade. They feel like they can afford to take that $20,000 and make a risky bet on some speculative investment because it's house money. If they lose it, well, they're just back to their original position. But if they win, they could double it. So the risk feels acceptable because of the mental category. But this is wrong. That $20,000, regardless of where it came from, is real money that could be invested conservatively for retirement. Losing it has the same economic impact as losing $20,000 from your salary. The fact that you didn't have it last year doesn't make it any less valuable now. But mental accounting makes it feel different. And that feeling causes people to take excessive risks and often lose money they should be preserving. The house money effect also shows up with windfalls. Someone receives an inheritance, or a bonus, or a tax refund, and because it feels like unexpected money, like a gift, they treat it differently. They spend it more freely. They don't subject it to the same scrutiny they'd apply to their regular income. And this causes them to spend money they should be saving or investing. At BlackRock, when we model wealth accumulation, we always assume that all money, regardless of source, gets treated rationally according to overall financial goals and time horizons. But in reality, individuals don't do this. They treat salary differently than bonuses. They treat bonuses differently than investment gains. They treat investment gains differently than inheritance. Each source gets categorized mentally, and each category gets treated according to different rules. And all of this inconsistency costs money. The third major form of mental accounting is payment depreciation. This is when people's willingness to spend money depends on how they paid for something rather than on the actual cost. It's why people spend more freely on credit cards than with cash. It's why people feel better about spending gift cards than spending actual money. The payment method creates a mental account, and that account gets treated differently. Let me give you an example. You go to dinner. The bill is $150. If you pay with cash, you physically hand over three $50 bills. You feel the pain of parting with that money. But if you pay with a credit card, you just swipe or tap. The pain is deferred. It's less salient. And because the pain is less, you're more likely to spend that $150. You're more likely to order appetizers, drinks, dessert. Because the payment method has reduced the psychological cost even though the actual economic cost is the same. This is mental accounting. The cash and the credit card are just different payment mechanisms. They both ultimately reduce your net worth by $150. But your brain treats them differently. Cash feels more real. Credit feels more abstract. And this mental difference causes you to spend more when using credit than you would if you were forced to use cash for everything. The cost of this is enormous. Studies show people spend 20% to 30% more when using credit cards versus cash. So if you're spending $50,000 per year on credit cards, you might be spending $10,000 to $15,000 more than you would if you used cash. Over 30 years, that's $300,000 to $450,000 in excess spending. That's money that could have been invested. At 7% returns, that excess spending represents nearly $1 million in foregone wealth. Now, I'm not saying you should only use cash. Credit cards have benefits, rewards, fraud protection, convenience. But you need to be aware of payment depreciation. You need to recognize that the payment method is affecting your spending behavior. And you need to compensate for that by being more intentional about spending regardless of payment method. The fourth form of mental accounting I see frequently is sunk cost fallacy. This is when people continue investing money or time into something because they've already invested money or time, even when it's no longer rational to continue. The past investment creates a mental account, and that account feels like it needs to be honored or validated, even at the expense of future wealth. Classic example. Someone buys a stock for $100 per share. The stock drops to $60. Economically, the question they should ask is, if I had $60 in cash right now, would I buy this stock at $60? If the answer is no, they should sell. But mental accounting prevents this. They think, I bought at $100. If I sell at $60, I'm locking in a $40 loss. I should hold until it gets back to $100. The original purchase price creates a mental reference point, and selling below that reference point feels like a loss, even though economically, the loss occurred when the stock dropped, not when they sell. This mental accounting causes people to hold losing investments far too long. They're anchored to their original purchase price. They're treating the money in that investment as a separate mental account with its own history rather than just asking the economically relevant question, is this the best use of my capital right now? At BlackRock, we avoid sunk cost fallacy by constantly evaluating our portfolios not based on what we paid but based on whether we want to own this asset at the current price given our current views and our clients' current needs. The past is irrelevant. What matters is forward-looking expected returns and risks. But individual investors struggle with this because mental accounting creates emotional attachment to past decisions. The fifth form of mental accounting is opportunity cost neglect. This is when people focus on explicit costs but ignore opportunity costs because opportunity costs are less psychologically salient. They're not in a clear mental account. Example: someone keeps $100,000 in a checking account earning 0% interest because they like having a large cushion and they don't think about what else they could do with that money. The opportunity cost is huge. If they invested $80,000 of that and kept $20,000 in checking, they'd earn roughly $5,600 per year at 7% returns on the invested portion. Over 30 years, that $80,000 becomes $609,000. The opportunity cost of keeping it all in checking is $500,000 in foregone wealth. But opportunity cost doesn't create a clear mental account. You're not writing a check. You're not seeing money leave your account. So it doesn't register psychologically the way explicit costs do. And this causes people to leave enormous amounts of money on the table. At BlackRock, opportunity cost is always part of our analysis. When we allocate capital, we're not just evaluating the direct use of that capital. We're evaluating what we're giving up by making that allocation rather than an alternative allocation. That's how you optimize. That's how you maximize wealth. But mental accounting prevents individuals from thinking this way because opportunity costs don't fit neatly into mental buckets the way explicit costs do. Now, let me calculate the total cost of mental accounting over a typical lifetime. Let's model someone from age 25 to 65, 40 years. Let's be conservative in our assumptions. Mental accounting cost 1. Oversaving in low-yield accounts rather than investing appropriately. Estimated impact: $80,000 over 40 years. Mental accounting cost 2. House money effect causing either excessive risk-taking that results in losses or premature spending of investment gains. Estimated impact: $60,000 over 40 years. Mental accounting cost 3. Payment depreciation causing excess spending via credit cards. Estimated impact: $400,000 in foregone investment returns over 40 years. Mental accounting cost 4. Sunk cost fallacy causing delayed selling of losing investments and therefore lower overall returns. Estimated impact: $100,000 over 40 years. Mental accounting cost 5. Opportunity cost neglect leaving money in low-return assets. Estimated impact: $200,000 over 40 years. Total estimated cost of mental accounting over a 40-year career: $840,000. Nearly $1 million. And this is with conservative assumptions. For people who engage in more extreme mental accounting, the cost could easily exceed $1 million. This is what mental accounting costs. This is what that psychological organization, that feeling of control and categorization, costs in real economic terms. And most people have no idea. They think they're being responsible. They think they're being smart. But they're leaving $1 million on the table over their lifetimes because they're optimizing for psychological comfort rather than economic outcomes. At BlackRock, when we show people these numbers, when we calculate the actual cost of their mental accounting behaviors, it's a wake-up call. People realize that their organizational system, their sense of being in control, it's been costing them their financial future. And once they see that, once they understand the magnitude, they're motivated to change. They're willing to adopt different frameworks that may feel less psychologically satisfying in the short term but that will result in substantially more wealth in the long term. Now let me address something important. Some people, when they hear this critique of mental accounting, they say, but wait, don't you need some level of budgeting and categorization? Don't you need to know what you're spending on different things? Isn't zero-based budgeting or envelope budgeting a good thing? And yes, tracking spending is valuable. Understanding where your money goes is important. But there's a difference between tracking for awareness and creating rigid mental accounts that constrain optimization. The key is to track your spending for informational purposes, to understand patterns and make informed decisions, but not to let those tracking categories become barriers to rational financial decision-making. You can know that you typically spend $500 per month on dining out without creating a mental account called dining out money. That can't be reallocated when you realize you'd build more wealth by reducing that spending. The problem with mental accounting isn't the tracking. It's the rigidity. It's treating money in different categories as fundamentally different when it's all economically equivalent. Track your spending. Understand your patterns. But maintain flexibility to optimize your overall financial situation rather than optimizing each mental bucket independently. At BlackRock, we track everything. We know exactly where every dollar is allocated. We monitor exposures meticulously, but we maintain complete flexibility to reallocate based on changing conditions and changing opportunities. The tracking informs decisions. It doesn't constrain them. That's the distinction individuals need to make. Track for awareness. Don't trap yourself in rigid mental accounts. Let me also talk about the social reinforcement of mental accounting, because this is part of why it's so persistent. Financial advice often reinforces mental accounting. Have an emergency fund. Have a vacation fund. Have a car replacement fund. Have a home repair fund. Each of these suggestions creates a mental account. And while the underlying concept, save for predictable expenses, is sound, the implementation of separate accounts for each purpose creates the rigidity and sub-optimization I've been describing. Moreover, banks and financial institutions profit from mental accounting. They want you to have multiple accounts with them. More accounts mean more deposits, more data, more touchpoints, more opportunities to market other products. So they actively encourage you to create multiple savings accounts for different purposes. They frame it as helping you organize and reach your goals. But it also serves their interests by keeping more money in their low-yielding savings accounts rather than having you move it to higher-yielding investments elsewhere. I'm not saying banks are malicious. But their incentives are not perfectly aligned with yours. They benefit from your mental accounting. You don't. So you need to be aware of that dynamic and make decisions based on your interests, not theirs. Similarly, there's social reinforcement. People brag about having multiple savings accounts. They feel virtuous and responsible. They get validation from peers who also engage in mental accounting. I have 7 different savings accounts for different goals. Wow, you're so organized. This social validation reinforces the behavior even though the behavior is economically suboptimal. People get psychological and social rewards for mental accounting, which makes it even harder to overcome even when they intellectually understand it's costing them money. At BlackRock, we're somewhat insulated from these social dynamics because we operate in a professional context where what matters is results, not appearances. If a portfolio strategy is suboptimal, we change it. We don't care if it looks organized or if it feels comfortable. We care if it achieves the client's objectives efficiently. Individual investors need to adopt more of that mindset. Care about outcomes, not about appearances or feelings. Optimize for wealth accumulation, not for psychological comfort or social validation. Now, I want to acknowledge that completely eliminating mental accounting is probably impossible and possibly undesirable. Some level of mental categorization helps us function. If we had to optimize every single financial decision from first principles every time, we'd be paralyzed. Mental shortcuts, including some forms of mental accounting, allow us to make reasonably good decisions quickly without exhausting our cognitive resources. The goal isn't perfection. The goal is awareness and reduction of the most costly forms of mental accounting. Identify where you're engaging in behaviors that are costing you significant money. Address those. Don't worry about eliminating every trace of mental accounting from your financial life. That's not realistic and probably not necessary. Just focus on the big wins. The places where mental accounting is costing you tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars over your lifetime. Fix those. That's where the value is. And here's the encouraging part. Once you fix the major mental accounting issues, the compounding effect is enormous. That $80,000 you're no longer leaving in low-yield savings accounts, invested over 30 years, becomes $600,000. That excess spending you eliminate by being aware of payment depreciation, redirected to investments, becomes $800,000. You're not making a million small changes. You're making a few big structural changes to how you think about and manage money. And those changes compound into massive wealth differences. This is what gets me excited about this topic. Because unlike many aspects of investing, which are uncertain and dependent on market conditions beyond your control, this is entirely within your control. Mental accounting is your choice. How you categorize money is your decision. Whether you maintain rigid mental buckets or flexible optimization is up to you. And the payoff for making the right choices is guaranteed. You will accumulate more wealth over your lifetime by reducing mental accounting. That's not a maybe. That's a certainty. So the question is, are you willing to trade some psychological comfort for substantial financial gain? Are you willing to let go of organizational systems that feel good but cost money? Are you willing to think about your finances as one integrated system rather than as multiple separate buckets? Because if you're willing to make that shift, the wealth accumulation difference over decades will be staggering. All right, let's get practical. Because understanding mental accounting and calculating its cost is valuable, but only if it leads to behavioral change. Only if it helps you restructure how you think about and manage money. And that's what I want to give you now. A comprehensive framework for overcoming mental accounting and optimizing your financial life as an integrated system rather than as disconnected buckets. The first principle, and this is foundational, is to adopt what I call the unified balance sheet mindset. Instead of thinking about your money as residing in different mental accounts, emergency fund, vacation fund, car fund, investment account, retirement account, think about your entire financial situation as one balance sheet. Assets on one side, liabilities on the other. Net worth is the difference. And every financial decision you make changes your net worth. That's the only thing that ultimately matters. This sounds simple, but it's a profound shift from how most people think. Most people think about their finances in terms of accounts and categories. They focus on individual pieces. Is my emergency fund fully funded? Is my vacation fund growing? Am I maxing out my 401k? These are all reasonable questions, but they're second-order questions. The first-order question is, what's my net worth and how is it changing over time? When you adopt a unified balance sheet mindset, several things become immediately clear. First, you see that having $50,000 in savings accounts while carrying $30,000 in credit card debt means your actual liquid net worth is $20,000, not $50,000. The mental accounts that previously allowed you to feel good about your savings despite your debt, they become irrelevant. You see the economic reality. Second, you see that moving $20,000 from a savings account earning 0.5% to a brokerage account invested at 7% doesn't change your net worth today, but it dramatically changes your net worth trajectory. You're not losing your emergency fund or vacation fund. You're just allocating capital more efficiently across your unified balance sheet. The money is still yours. It's just working harder. Third, you see that every dollar has the same economic value regardless of its source or its mental label. A dollar from salary, a dollar from investment gains, a dollar from tax refund, a dollar from inheritance. They're all worth exactly $1. They all contribute equally to your net worth, and they should all be allocated according to the same rational framework. What use of this dollar maximizes my risk-adjusted return given my time horizon and goals? At BlackRock, this is how we think about institutional portfolios. We don't care which account money came from or what label it has. We care about the total portfolio. What's our asset allocation? What's our expected return? What's our risk level? How do we optimize the whole system? Individual investors should adopt exactly the same approach. Stop thinking in accounts and labels. Start thinking in terms of total net worth and optimal allocation of your total capital. Now, the second principle is to organize your finances based on time horizons, not purposes. This is critical because it's the distinction between rational financial planning and mental accounting. Mental accounting organizes by purpose. Emergency fund, vacation fund, car fund. Rational planning organizes by when you need the money. Next year, 5 years, 10 years, 30 years. Purpose creates psychological categories. Time horizon creates economic categories. Let me show you how this works in practice. Instead of having 8 different savings accounts like David, you have 3 tiers based on time horizon. Tier 1. Immediate liquidity. This is money you need to access within the next 12 months. This includes your emergency fund, but it's not just your emergency fund. It's any expense you're confident will occur in the next year. Property taxes, insurance premiums, planned home repairs, holiday spending. Sum up all of these expenses. Add a buffer for true emergencies. That total is your Tier 1. This money should be in high-yield savings or money market funds earning 4% to 5%. Maximum safety, maximum liquidity, but also maximum yield for that safety and liquidity profile. Tier 2. Medium-term needs. This is money you'll need in 1 to 10 years. Car replacement in 5 years. Home down payment in 7 years. Kids' college in 8 years. This money should be invested, but conservatively. Maybe 60% bonds, 40% stocks. Or maybe a target date fund aligned with when you'll need the money. The point is, you're taking some risk to earn better returns than Tier 1, but not so much risk that a market downturn in year 3 or 4 destroys your ability to access the money when you need it. Tier 3. Long-term wealth building. This is money you won't need for more than 10 years. Primarily retirement, but also any other long-term goals. This money should be invested aggressively. Mostly stocks, maybe some alternatives. Maximum growth. You can tolerate volatility because you have time to recover from downturns. And you want to maximize compounding over decades. Notice what we've done here. We've eliminated purposes and labels. We're not thinking about what the money is for. We're thinking about when we need it. And we're allocating based on that time horizon. This allows for much more efficient capital allocation because we're not over-allocating to safety just because something has a specific purpose label. David's mistake was that he treated his vacation fund and his car fund and his home repair fund as if they all needed to be in cash immediately available, just because they had specific purposes. But economically, he didn't need all of that money immediately. Some of those purposes were years away. He could have invested that money and earned substantially more while still having it available when he actually needed it. At BlackRock, every allocation decision starts with time horizon. What's the investment horizon? When will this capital be needed? That determines the risk profile and expected return target. Purpose is completely secondary. We might be investing for pension payments or endowment spending or sovereign wealth preservation, but those purposes don't drive the allocation. Time horizon drives the allocation. That's rational. That's economically optimal. The third principle is to automate your system to reduce decision fatigue and eliminate opportunities for mental accounting. Because even if you intellectually understand that mental accounting is harmful, you're still human. You're still subject to cognitive biases. You're still going to feel tempted to treat money differently based on psychological factors. Automation removes that temptation by removing the decision points. Here's what I mean. Set up automatic transfers from your checking account to your 3 tiers on the day you get paid. Before you see the money, before you can mentally categorize it, before you can decide to treat it differently based on how you're feeling that day, it's allocated. Tier 1 gets its allocation. Tier 2 gets its allocation. Tier 3 gets its allocation. You've removed the opportunity for mental accounting to interfere. Similarly, automate rebalancing. If you've decided your Tier 2 allocation should be 60% bonds and 40% stocks, set up automatic quarterly rebalancing to maintain that ratio. Don't manually decide when to rebalance based on how you feel about markets or whether you're up or down. Automate it. Remove emotion. Remove mental accounting. And automate bill payments. Don't manually pay bills each month from your checking account, creating opportunities to mentally categorize and stress about each payment. Automate everything possible. The less you're manually interacting with money movement, the less opportunity there is for mental accounting to distort your decisions. At BlackRock, we use extensive automation. Not because we don't trust our judgment, but because we know that reducing manual decision points reduces error rates and reduces behavioral bias. Humans make mistakes when they're tired, when they're stressed, when they're emotional. Automation doesn't have those vulnerabilities. Set the parameters correctly once, then let the system execute. That's how you maintain discipline over decades. The fourth principle is to think in terms of marginal utility rather than absolute amounts. This is how you overcome the house money effect and similar forms of mental accounting. Every dollar you have, regardless of where it came from, should be allocated to its highest value use at the margin. Not based on its history. Not based on its source. Based on what will maximize your well-being given your current circumstances. Let me make this concrete. You receive a $10,000 bonus. Mental accounting says, this is bonus money, not salary money, so I can spend it more freely. Marginal utility thinking says, I have $10,000. What's the highest value use of this $10,000 given my current financial situation? Do I have high interest debt? Paying that off returns 18% guaranteed. Do I have inadequate emergency funds? Building that provides enormous peace of mind and security. Am I behind on retirement savings? Investing this provides 7% expected long-term return. Given these options, what's the best use? The answer is usually obvious when you frame it this way. But mental accounting prevents you from even asking the question. It predetermines the answer based on psychological categories rather than economic analysis. Marginal utility thinking forces you to ask the right question every time. What's the best use of this next dollar? At BlackRock, every capital allocation decision is a marginal decision. We don't care what we paid for an asset. We don't care where money came from. We care about what's the best use of capital right now given current market conditions and client objectives. That's marginal thinking. And it's how you maximize wealth over time. The fifth principle is to regularly audit your financial structure and ask, is this serving my economic objectives or is this serving my psychological needs? Be honest. Be ruthless. If you have 8 savings accounts because they make you feel organized and in control, but they're costing you $300,000 over your lifetime, they're not serving your economic objectives. They're serving your psychological needs at enormous cost. And you need to decide whether that cost is worth it. I'm not saying psychology doesn't matter. Clearly it does. If a financial structure causes you so much anxiety that you can't function, then it's not optimal even if it's economically superior on paper. But most of the time, the psychological comfort of mental accounting is not worth $300,000. Most of the time, people can adapt to a more economically efficient structure if they understand why it's better and if they implement it thoughtfully. So audit your finances annually. Look at your accounts. Look at your balances. Look at your yields. Look at your allocation. And ask, why is this money here? Is there a good economic reason? Or is it here because of habit, because of mental accounting, because I set this up 5 years ago and never reconsidered it? If the answer is the latter, change it. Move money from low-yield accounts to higher-yield accounts. Consolidate accounts. Simplify. Optimize. Every year, make your financial structure slightly more efficient, slightly more rational, slightly more economically optimized. Over time, these small annual adjustments compound into massive improvements in your net worth trajectory. At BlackRock, we have regular portfolio reviews. We don't just set an allocation and forget it. We constantly evaluate whether the current structure is optimal given current conditions. Is this still the best use of capital? Are there better opportunities? Should we rebalance? Should we adjust risk levels? This constant evaluation and adjustment is what maintains optimal performance over time. Individual investors should do exactly the same thing. Now, let me give you a specific implementation plan. A step-by-step process for transitioning from a mental accounting framework to a unified balance sheet framework. Step 1. Create your actual balance sheet. List every asset you have and its current value. Checking accounts, savings accounts, brokerage accounts, retirement accounts, real estate, everything. Then list every liability and its current value and interest rate. Credit cards, student loans, mortgage, car loans, everything. Calculate your net worth. This is your baseline. Step 2. Categorize your assets by current time horizon, not by mental label. Look at each account and ask, when do I realistically need access to this money? Not what is it labeled for, but when do I need it? This will reveal inefficiencies. Money sitting in vacation fund that you're not using for 3 years is actually Tier 2 money, not Tier 1 money. Reallocating it can earn you thousands of dollars per year with no additional risk. Step 3. Optimize each tier. For Tier 1, move everything to the highest yield savings account or money market fund you can find. Don't settle for 0.5% when you can get 4.5%. For Tier 2, invest appropriately based on your time horizon. 5-year money can handle more risk than 2-year money. 10-year money can handle even more. For Tier 3, make sure you're in a well-diversified, low-cost, age-appropriate portfolio. If you're young, you should be mostly stocks. If you're older, shift gradually toward bonds. Step 4. Set up automation. Automatic contributions from checking to your 3 tiers. Automatic rebalancing within each tier. Automatic bill payments. Automatic everything. Remove manual decision points. Remove opportunities for mental accounting to creep back in. Step 5. Consolidate accounts. You don't need 8 savings accounts. You probably need 1 high-yield savings for Tier 1, 1 brokerage account for Tier 2, and 1 or 2 retirement accounts for Tier 3. That's it. 4 accounts total, maybe 5 or 6 if you have both traditional and Roth retirement accounts and a taxable brokerage. But not 8 or 10 or 12. Simplify. Fewer accounts means fewer opportunities for mental accounting. It means easier monitoring. It means lower maintenance and potentially lower fees. Step 6. Track your unified net worth, not individual account balances. Create a spreadsheet or use software that shows your total net worth and tracks how it changes over time. This is your key metric. Not whether your emergency fund is at some arbitrary target. Not whether your vacation fund has enough for next summer's trip. Your total net worth. That's what matters. And watching that number grow month after month, year after year, is what will reinforce your new unified thinking. Step 7. Revisit annually. Every year, typically at the same time you're doing taxes or planning for the next year, review your entire financial structure. Are assets allocated optimally? Are there new inefficiencies that have crept in? Do time horizons need adjustment based on changed plans? Should you rebalance across tiers? This annual check-in keeps you on track and prevents drift back toward mental accounting. At BlackRock, this is basically our process with clients, just scaled up massively. We create comprehensive balance sheets. We categorize by time horizon and risk tolerance. We optimize allocation within each category. We automate execution. We consolidate when possible. We track total performance. And we review and adjust regularly. The principles are exactly the same whether you're managing $1 billion or $100,000. It's just about being disciplined and systematic. Now, let me address some common objections I hear when I talk about eliminating mental accounting. First objection. But I need the psychological comfort of separate accounts. I need to see my emergency fund separate from my vacation fund. It helps me feel secure. And I understand that. Psychological comfort matters. But you need to ask yourself, is that comfort worth $300,000 over my lifetime? Because that's what it's costing you. If the answer is yes, fine. Make that choice consciously. But at least understand the trade-off you're making. And often, people find that once they adapt to the new system, once they get used to thinking in terms of unified net worth rather than separate buckets, the psychological comfort of the old system wasn't as valuable as they thought. They get new comfort from watching their total net worth grow faster than it did under the old system. The optimization itself becomes psychologically satisfying. They've traded one source of comfort for another, and they're $300,000 richer for it. Second objection. But what if I need to access money quickly? Doesn't having separate accounts make that easier? No. Having money in Tier 1, your high liquidity tier, makes that easy. The Tier 1 money is just as accessible whether it's in one account or split across 5 accounts. You're not sacrificing liquidity by consolidating. You're just eliminating unnecessary complexity. Third objection. But my bank advisor told me to set up separate accounts for different goals. Are they wrong? Not necessarily wrong, but potentially not optimizing for your economic interests. Banks benefit from having more of your money in their savings accounts. Advisors sometimes suggest separate accounts because it's easy to explain and it makes clients feel organized. But neither banks nor advisors pay the opportunity cost of suboptimal allocation. You do. So you need to think critically about their advice and make decisions based on your interests, not theirs. Let me close with this. Mental accounting is one of the most expensive psychological biases in personal finance. It costs people hundreds of thousands of dollars over their lifetimes. And the tragic part is that it feels responsible. It feels smart. It feels like good financial management. You're organizing your money. You're planning ahead. You're being thoughtful. All true. But you're also dramatically suboptimizing your wealth accumulation because you're prioritizing psychological categorization over economic optimization. The solution is to adopt a unified balance sheet mindset. Think about your finances as one integrated system with one goal. Maximize net worth growth over time subject to your liquidity needs and risk tolerance. Organize by time horizon, not by purpose. Automate to eliminate decision fatigue. Think in marginal utility terms. And regularly audit and optimize your structure. This requires a mindset shift. It requires letting go of habits and mental models that feel comfortable. It requires being willing to simplify and consolidate. But the payoff is enormous. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars in additional wealth over your lifetime. We're talking about the difference between a comfortable retirement and a stressed retirement. We're talking about building real financial security rather than just the illusion of organization. At BlackRock, we optimize portfolios for economic outcomes. We don't optimize for psychological comfort or organizational aesthetics. And that's why we're successful in building wealth for our clients. Individual investors should adopt the same approach. Optimize for outcomes. Let go of mental accounting. Think in systems, not buckets. And watch your wealth grow in ways that wouldn't have been possible under the old mental accounting framework. This is one of those areas where knowledge really is power. Once you understand mental accounting, once you see how it works and how much it costs, you can't unsee it. Every time you're tempted to create another savings account for another purpose, you'll remember, this is mental accounting. This is costing me money. Let me allocate this capital rationally based on time horizon instead. And that moment of awareness, repeated over decades, will compound into hundreds of thousands of dollars of additional wealth. So make the shift. Adopt the unified framework. Optimize your system. And enjoy the wealth accumulation that comes from thinking clearly about money rather than falling into expensive psychological traps. Because that's ultimately what separates people who build significant wealth from people who don't. Not income, not luck, but clear thinking, rational decision-making, and the discipline to overcome cognitive biases like mental accounting that destroy wealth silently, invisibly, but devastatingly over time. You now have the knowledge. You now have the framework. The only question is, will you implement it? Will you overcome the inertia and the psychological comfort of your current system? Will you make the changes necessary to optimize for economic outcomes rather than psychological comfort? Because if you do, if you commit to this transition, you'll look back in 10 years, in 20 years, in 40 years, and you'll be enormously grateful that you made the shift. Your future self will thank you. Your net worth will thank you. And your retirement will thank you. Make the choice. Make the shift. And start building wealth through clear thinking about money.